The whisper came from the back of the auction hall, but it cut through the silence like a blade drawn slowly across glass. "He doesn't belong here." Marcus Webb heard it. His 7-year-old son Isaiah heard it too, small fingers tightening around his father's calloused hand, knuckles pressing white against dark skin. 300 people filled the gilded room of the Harrington estate, draped in silk and diamonds, and the kind of casual wealth that made ordinary people feel like trespassers in their own country. Marcus stood near the back wall, wearing the only suit he owned, the charcoal gray one Rachel had picked out for him 11 years ago, back when she believed he would need it for job interviews and parent-teacher conferences and all the ordinary moments of an ordinary life. She hadn't known then that it would become his armor, that he would wear it to her funeral, that he would wear it again tonight, standing in a room full of billionaires who looked at him like he was something tracked in on the bottom of their imported Italian shoes. Stay with me for a moment, just a moment, because what happens next in this room will change everything you think you know about power, about dignity, about what a father will do when the world tries to break his son. The auction house smelled of old money and fresh flowers, an arrangement of white lilies positioned near the entrance that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month at the restoration shop. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings painted with scenes of Greek mythology, gods and mortals frozen in eternal struggle, light fractured through 10,000 pieces of hand-cut glass and scattered across the crowd like diamonds thrown by a careless hand. Marcus had spent 22 years restoring paintings for the wealthy, his steady hands bringing masterpieces back from the edge of ruin. He had touched Monets and Vermeers and Caravaggios, had breathed life back into canvases that museums would kill to own. But he had never been invited to stand among the people who collected them. Not until tonight. Not until the letter arrived 3 weeks ago, cream-colored envelope, gold-embossed letterhead, informing him that his late grandmother's painting, the one that had hung above her fireplace in the tiny apartment in Detroit where she raised 6 children on a seamstress's salary, had been authenticated as a lost work by Henry Asawa Tanner. Estimated value at auction between $8 and $12 million. His grandmother had called it the Fisherman's Prayer. She said her own grandmother had been given it by a kind white woman in Philadelphia back in 1912, payment for years of domestic service. 4 generations of Webb women had dusted that frame, had walked past it on their way to kitchens and cleaning jobs and factory floors, never knowing they were brushing shoulders with history. Now Marcus stood in a room full of people who wanted to take it from him. Isaiah tugged at his hand. "Daddy, why are they looking at us like that?" Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to his son's eye level, the way he always did when something important needed to be said. Isaiah had his mother's eyes, that deep brown that caught light and held it, that seemed to see straight through pretense and posturing to the truth underneath. Rachel's eyes, the eyes that had looked at Marcus on their first date and seen past the quiet exterior to something worth loving. "Because they're not used to people like us being in places like this," Marcus said softly. "But that doesn't mean we don't belong here. We belong anywhere we choose to stand." Isaiah nodded slowly, processing this the way he processed everything, with a seriousness that made him seem older than his 7 years. He had been serious since the day Rachel collapsed in the kitchen, since the ambulance came and took her away and never brought her back. Aneurysm, the doctor said. Undetectable until it ruptured. She was 34 years old, laughing at something Isaiah said about his teacher's funny shoes, and then she was gone. That was 2 years ago. Some days it felt like yesterday. Some days it felt like a wound that had always been there, a part of Marcus's anatomy now, something he would carry until he stopped carrying anything at all. "Mr. Webb?" Marcus stood and turned. A woman approached them through the crowd, parting the sea of silk and judgment with the easy confidence of someone who had never been made to feel small. She was perhaps 60, silver hair swept back from a face that had been beautiful once and was handsome now, lines of character rather than age, mapping the landscape of her features. Her dress was simple, black, probably cost more than Marcus's car. "I'm Eleanor Ashford," she said, extending her hand. "I chair the board of the Harrington Museum. I wanted to personally welcome you to this evening's auction." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, the directness of her gaze. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford. This is my son, Isaiah." Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at the boy. "Hello, Isaiah. That's a wonderful name. Do you know what it means?" Isaiah straightened his small shoulders. "Salvation of the Lord. My mama picked it." Something flickered across Eleanor's face, a recognition of loss that suggested she understood more than her polished exterior revealed. "Your mother had excellent taste." She looked back at Marcus. "I wanted you to know that what's happening tonight is significant. The fisherman's prayer hasn't been seen publicly in over a century. Its provenance coming through your family is itself a remarkable piece of American history." "I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm not here to sell." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're not?" "No, ma'am. I'm here because I was required to attend for the authentication to be finalized. But that painting hung in my grandmother's home for 60 years. It hung in my mother's home after that. It belongs in my home now, where my son can grow up seeing it every day, the way I did." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the distinct impression he was being reassessed, recalculated, placed in a different category than the one she had initially assigned him. "Mr. Webb," she said carefully, "you should know that there are people here tonight who will not accept that answer. The Harrington family in particular has been trying to acquire this piece for decades. They believe it was improperly removed from their collection." "Improperly removed?" "Stolen." The word hung in the air between them. "They have documentation suggesting it was taken from the Harrington estate in 1908 by a domestic worker, a woman named Bessie Johnson." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Bessie Johnson had been his great-great-grandmother. The kind white woman who had given her the painting had been Victoria Harrington, matriarch of the family whose name was carved into the marble above the entrance of this very building. "Given," Marcus said quietly. "Not taken. Given. I have letters." "I'm sure you do." Eleanor's voice carried no judgment, only warning. "But the Harringtons have lawyers, many lawyers, and they have decided that tonight, one way or another, that painting will return to their family." Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation, sharp and cultured and dripping with contempt. "Eleanor, surely you have better things to do than fraternize with the help." The man who approached them was perhaps 45, tall and lean with the kind of angular features that photographed well and aged better. His suit was charcoal gray, almost identical to Marcus's, but the similarity only highlighted the differences. Everything about this man was polished, from the gleam of his cufflinks to the precision of his haircut to the practiced ease of his cruelty. "Preston," Eleanor said, and her voice had gone carefully neutral. "I was just welcoming Mr. Webb to the auction." Preston Harrington III looked at Marcus the way one might look at a stain on an antique carpet, with irritation and faint disgust, and the absolute certainty that it would be removed. "Yes, I've heard about Mr. Webb, the restorer who thinks he owns a masterpiece because his great-great-grandmother was a thief." Isaiah pressed closer to Marcus's leg. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, steadying him, steadying himself. "My great-great-grandmother was a good woman who worked hard her entire life," Marcus said, his voice even. "And whatever your family's lawyers say, I have documentation proving that painting was a gift." Preston smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nothing about this man reached his eyes. Documentation can be challenged, provenance can be disputed, and at the end of the day, Mr. Webb, the justice system tends to favor those who can afford to pursue it. He adjusted his cufflinks, a casual gesture that somehow managed to convey absolute certainty. "I suggest you accept my offer, $400,000. More than fair for a painting your family acquired through questionable means. It's worth $12 million. It's worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And I'm telling you now, no one in this room will bid against me, not for this piece, Not when they know what happens to people who cross the Harrington family. Marcus felt the old stillness settling over him, the one he had learned in another life, before Rachel, before Isaiah, before he had become the man he was now. 14 years in military intelligence had taught him many things: how to read a room, how to identify threats, how to wait with perfect patience for the moment when waiting was no longer an option. But those days were behind him. He had left that world when Isaiah was born, had walked away from classified operations and need-to-know briefings and the moral gray zones that haunted his dreams. He had chosen sawdust and paint thinner, the honest work of restoration, the slow and careful process of bringing damaged things back to beauty. "Mr. Harrington," Marcus said quietly, "I'm not going to sell my grandmother's painting. Not for 400,000. Not for 12 million. Not for any amount you or anyone else offers. That painting is my son's inheritance. It's his connection to a history that your family tried very hard to erase." Preston's smile thinned. "Careful, Mr. Webb. You're speaking to the wrong person in the wrong tone. I'm speaking to a man who thinks his money makes him untouchable, but I've known men like you before, men who confuse wealth with worth, men who think they can take whatever they want because no one has ever told them no." Marcus met Preston's gaze and held it. "I'm telling you no." The silence that followed was absolute. Around them, conversations had stopped. Champagne glasses hung suspended between table and lip. The entire room had become an audience to a confrontation they had never expected to witness. Preston's face had gone rigid, the polished surface cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you know who you're dealing with." Preston stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne, something expensive and aggressive, designed to intimidate. "Let me make this very clear. By the end of tonight, that painting will be back in my family's collection. You can accept my offer and walk away with something, or you can refuse, and my lawyers will ensure you walk away with nothing. Your choice." He turned and walked away, the crowd parting before him like water before the prow of a ship. Eleanor touched Marcus's arm. "Mr. Webb, I'm sorry. I should have warned you more clearly about what you were walking into. You warned me enough." Marcus looked down at Isaiah, who was staring up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Let's get some air, little man." They walked through the crowd toward the terrace doors, and Marcus felt the weight of every gaze that followed them. Some were curious, some were pitying. A few, a precious few, held something that looked like respect. The terrace overlooked a garden that stretched into darkness, sculpted hedges and fountain pools illuminated by carefully positioned lights. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass, a manufactured paradise for manufactured people. Isaiah sat on a stone bench, his small legs dangling above the ground. "Daddy, that man was mean." "Yes, he was. Why does he want Grandma's painting so bad?" Marcus sat beside his son, looking out at the garden, gathering his thoughts. "Because his family used to own a lot of paintings, and somewhere along the way, they decided that they should own all the paintings they ever owned, forever, no matter who else they belonged to now. But Grandma Bessie didn't steal it. You said she didn't." "She didn't. Victoria Harrington gave it to her. I've read the letters, Isaiah. Victoria was dying. She knew her family wouldn't approve of the gift, so she gave it quietly, privately, with a note explaining why." Marcus paused, remembering the faded handwriting, the formal language that couldn't quite hide the affection underneath. She said Bessie was the only person in 30 years of service who ever treated her like a human being instead of an obligation. Preston Harrington sat in the front row, surrounded by advisors and associates, occasionally turning to scan the room with proprietary satisfaction. When his eyes found Marcus, he smiled. "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. "The Fisherman's Prayer, attributed to Henry Ossawa Tanner, circa 1904. We'll start the bidding at $3 million. Marcus felt Isaiah tense beside him. "3 million to start," the auctioneer continued. "Do I hear 3 million?" Preston's paddle rose lazily. 3 million to Mr. Harrington. Do I hear 4? Silence. 3 million going once. 3 million going twice. Point of order. Marcus stood, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "This painting is not for sale." The auctioneer blinked, flustered. "Sir, the painting has been consigned for auction. The authentication process required my attendance but not my consent to sell." Marcus pulled a document from his jacket pocket. "This is a notarized statement withdrawing the painting from auction. According to your own bylaws, the owner may withdraw any item up until the hammer falls." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Preston was on his feet, face flushed with rage. "This is absurd. The painting is part of the Harrington collection. It was stolen. It was given." Marcus's voice cut through the noise like a knife through silk. "And I have proof." He walked forward, Isaiah's hand in his, moving through the crowd with the same steady purpose he had once brought to operations in places whose names were still classified. People shifted aside, uncertain, as if sensing something in his bearing that made them reconsider their initial assessments. He reached the front of the room and turned to face the assembled collectors, the billionaires and socialites, and old-money aristocrats who had dismissed him as an interloper in their gilded world. "My name is Marcus Webb. My great-great-grandmother was Bessie Johnson. For 32 years, she worked in the Harrington household. She raised 3 generations of Harrington children. She buried 2 of her own children during that time and came to work the next day because she had no choice." He pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "This is a letter from Victoria Harrington to Bessie Johnson, dated March 14, 1908. In it, Victoria acknowledges that she is dying. She acknowledges that her family will contest any gift she makes to a black woman, and she explains why she is giving the fisherman's prayer to Bessie anyway." He opened the envelope and began to read, his voice steady and clear. "My dear Bessie, you have been the only true friend I have known in this house of strangers. You have seen me at my worst and treated me with kindness I did not deserve. You have shared your wisdom, your patience, and your grace with a woman whose own family never bothered to learn her name. I am giving you this painting not because you have earned it, though you have earned far more. I am giving it to you because it was painted by a man who understood what it means to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to create beauty in a world that would prefer you didn't exist. Keep it. Pass it to your children. Let it remind them and theirs after that their worth was never determined by the people who refused. And we will continue to keep it because it was never yours to take back." Preston's voice came strangled, barely controlled. "That letter proves nothing. It could be a forgery. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers will find that this letter has been authenticated by the same experts who authenticated the painting itself. They will also find that the Harrington family archives contain Victoria's diary, in which she records both the gift and her reasons for making it." Marcus's gaze was steady. "I know this because Eleanor Ashford allowed me to review those archives this afternoon. It seems not everyone in this room believes that wealth entitles you to rewrite history." He turned to look at Eleanor, who stood near the side of the room with an expression that was carefully neutral, but not quite neutral enough to hide her satisfaction. "Mr. Harrington," Marcus continued, addressing the room as much as Preston, "I did not come here tonight to humiliate you. I came here to protect my son's inheritance, to honor my grandmother's memory, to stand in a room where people like me have never been welcome and remind everyone present that we have always been here. Building your houses, raising your children, restoring your paintings." He paused. "Creating your art." He took Isaiah's hand. "Henry Osawa Tanner painted The Fisherman's Prayer while living in Paris because America would not accept a black man as a serious artist. He painted scenes of faith and dignity because the world offered him neither, and a century later, his work hangs in museums around the world, owned by people who would have crossed the street to avoid him when he was alive." Marcus looked at his son, then back at the crowd. "My grandmother used to tell me that the painting wasn't valuable because of who made it or what it was worth. It was valuable because of what it represented, the possibility that someone with nothing could create something eternal, the proof that our hands could shape beauty even when they were only supposed to shape labor. He walked toward the door, Isaiah beside him, the crowd parting silently. At the threshold, he stopped and turned one last time. The painting is not for sale. It never was. And if your lawyers want to continue this conversation, they know where to find me. He walked out into the night, his son's hand warm in his. They drove home in silence, the city lights giving way to suburbs, giving way to the quiet street where their small house waited, ordinary and perfect, with a garden Rachel had planted, and a porch Isaiah had helped paint, and a space above the fireplace where a masterpiece would hang. Inside, Marcus made hot chocolate while Isaiah changed into his pajamas. They sat together on the couch, the painting propped against the wall where the movers would hang it tomorrow, wrapped in protective cloth but present, claiming its place in another Webb home. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Little man?" "I was really proud of you tonight." Marcus felt something crack in his chest, the same feeling he got whenever Isaiah said things that Rachel would have said, in the same tone Rachel would have used. "I was proud of you, too. You were brave." Isaiah sipped his hot chocolate, leaving a marshmallow mustache on his upper lip. "Do you think they'll leave us alone now?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think some of them will. The ones who were watching tonight learned something they didn't expect to learn, and some of them might not leave us alone. But that's okay, because we know who we are. We know what we're worth, and no amount of money or lawyers or fancy auction houses can change that." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "Mama always said that. She said worth comes from inside. Your mama was the smartest person I ever knew." "Smarter than you?" "Much smarter than me." Marcus smiled. "She just let me think I was catching up." They finished their hot chocolate in comfortable silence. Marcus carried Isaiah to bed, tucked him in, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his son drift toward sleep. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Can we put the painting in my room, just for a little while? I want to see what Grandma Bessie saw every morning." Marcus's throat tightened. "We can do that, just for a little while." He walked back to the living room and carefully unwrapped the painting, revealing it fully for the first time since it had arrived from the authenticators. The fisherman's prayer showed a dark-skinned man, kneeling on a beach at dawn, hands clasped, face turned toward a sky that was breaking into gold and rose and violet. The ocean stretched behind him, vast and indifferent, and his small boat waited on the sand, nets piled beside it, the tools of his labor and his survival. But the man wasn't looking at the ocean or the boat or the nets. He was looking up, and in his posture, in the set of his shoulders and the lift of his chin, there was something that transcended the paint and canvas and century that separated him from the man now standing before him. Hope, despite everything. Despite the world that would try to break him, despite the water that could drown him and the poverty that could starve him and the society that would refuse to see him as fully human. Hope. Marcus touched the frame gently, the same way he touched damaged masterpieces in his workshop, with reverence and care and the knowledge that he was holding something precious. "Thank you, Grandma Bessie," he whispered. "I'll take care of it. I promise." He carried the painting to Isaiah's room and leaned it against the wall where his son could see it from his bed. Isaiah was already asleep, breathing softly, one hand tucked under his cheek. Marcus stood in the doorway, looking at his son, looking at the painting, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Webb women who had stood in their own doorways, looking at their own children, hoping for something better. The hope wasn't naive. It had never been naive. It had been earned daily, through work and sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to accept that the world's cruelty was the final word, and it would continue, through Isaiah, through whatever children Isaiah might have someday, through generations not yet born who would stand in their own rooms and look at a painting given in love, preserved in love, passed down in love. The fisherman in the painting was still praying. He had been praying for over a century now, frozen in that moment of faith and vulnerability and strength. Marcus understood him now, understood what it meant to kneel before an indifferent universe and ask for nothing more than the chance to keep going, the chance to provide, the chance to love and be loved and leave something behind that mattered. He closed Isaiah's door softly and walked to his own bedroom, to the empty bed that still felt too large, to the pillow that still held the faint scent of Rachel's shampoo, even though he knew that was impossible. That memory was playing tricks on him, that love sometimes refuses to accept the evidence of the senses. He lay in the darkness and thought about the auction, about Preston Harrington's face when the letter was read, about Eleanor Ashford's quiet alliance, about the way the crowd had parted for him as he walked out, not from deference to his wealth or his power, but from something else entirely, recognition of what it meant to stand for something, of what it cost and what it was worth. Marcus Webb had been many things in his life: a soldier who learned to survive, a craftsman who learned to restore, a husband who learned to love, a father who learned that love was not enough and then learned that it had to be enough anyway. But tonight, standing in that gilded room, he had been something simpler, something his grandmother would have understood, something his son would remember, a man who refused to be moved. And somewhere he knew Rachel was watching, smiling that smile of hers, the one that said she had seen this in him from the very beginning, had known what he was capable of becoming even when he couldn't see it himself. Not just a protector, not just a provider, a keeper of beauty in an ugly world, a guardian of hope in a hopeless time, a father who taught his son that some things matter more than money, more than safety, more than the approval of people who would never see you as fully human anyway. The painting hung in Isaiah's room, and the fisherman kept praying, and the dawn in the painting kept breaking, and somewhere in the darkness of a quiet house on a quiet street, a man who had learned to fight was learning, still, the harder lesson of how to stand. Morning would come. There would be lawyers and letters and the long, slow grind of people with money trying to take what wasn't theirs. But tonight, there was peace. Tonight, there was a boy sleeping beneath a masterpiece. Tonight, there was a father who had kept his promise. And that was enough. It would always be enough.